A new generation of leaders is now pressing for the restoration of rights promised by MA63. They are not asking for special favors. They are insisting that the original deal be honored in both spirit and law. Before we start, a quick note. This video is based on careful research, but it's still one interpretation of a complex history. Many of you watching will have first-hand experience of what the Malaysian Agreement of 1963 and federal-state relations actually feel like on the ground, especially in Sabah and Sarawak. If you see important details I've missed or have insights that can deepen this discussion, please share them in the comments so others can learn from you as well. If you look at the map of Malaysia, you will see it looks like a country split in two by a giant stretch of sea. On one side is Peninsular Malaysia, where the capital city Kuala Lumpur is located and where most of the people live and most of the country's industry and services are concentrated. On the other side of the water, on the huge island of Borneo, are Sabah and Sarawak. Often called East Malaysia, these two regions are known for rich rainforests, high mountains like Mount Kinabalu, and a huge variety of cultures and indigenous communities. Today, in the mid-2020s, many people in Sabah and Sarawak feel that the promises made to them when Malaysia was created have not been fully honored. They argue that the central government across the sea has too much power over their affairs and too much control over the wealth taken from their land and waters. Some groups are now asking a hard question. If the deal we signed is not respected, why should we keep playing by those rules? To understand why they are upset, it helps to go back more than 60 years. In the early 1960s, the country called Malaysia did not yet exist. There was the Federation of Malaya and the Peninsula, and separately there were the British territories of North Borneo, now Sabah, and Sarawak, as well as Singapore. Malaya and the British government wanted to form a larger new federation. Sabah and Sarawak were cautious because they feared domination by the more populous peninsula and the loss of control over their resources. And so, to make this acceptable, a special international treaty was negotiated. This is where the Malaysia Agreement of 1963 comes in. We can also call this MA63. A simple way to picture MA63 is to compare it to a rule book for starting a new club. Under this deal, Sabah and Sarawak did not see themselves as ordinary new members joining an existing Malayan club. They were founding partners alongside Malaya. Because they were geographically distant and had very different histories, they were given special safeguards and additional autonomy on matters like immigration, land, and native customs. Over the 6 decades since 1963, that original spirit of partnership is widely seen in East Malaysia as having been diluted. Constitutional amendments and federal policies gradually centralized powers in Kuala Lumpur, and Sabah and Sarawak were often treated as just two of many states rather than regions with a distinct founding role. The biggest issue is oil and gas. While these resources help fund infrastructure and development in the peninsula, basic services in Borneo like rural roads, healthcare, and internet still lag behind in many areas. In the eyes of many Borneo residents, they help pay for a very large pizza but have only been getting a small slice. On top of that, court cases and political debates in the 2010s and 2020s have highlighted how unclear or contested some of MA63's financial and autonomy arrangements have become. Lawyers and activists argue that key promises were allowed to fade through neglect, centralizing laws and uneven implementation rather than being clearly replaced in a way that East Malaysians consented to. A new generation of leaders is now pressing for the restoration of rights promised by MA63. They are not asking for special favors. They are insisting that the original deal be honored in both spirit and law. For Sabah, a central issue is a revenue sharing formula in the federal constitution. Sabah is entitled to a special grant of 40% of the increase in net revenue that the federal government derives from the state. For decades, this formula was not properly or transparently applied, leading to a legal and political tug-of-war over what exactly the federal government owes. As of early 2026, the federal government has increased interim payments to about 600 million ringgits a year as a special grant, which it presents as a record commitment under recent budgets. But Sabah leaders and legal commentators are clear. These are temporary measures, and the exact constitutional entitlement remains unresolved. They are fighting for the full constitutional 40% to be recognized as a binding obligation, not just a policy choice that can be changed by whoever is in power. Ongoing court cases and negotiations show that this is far from a settled question and that the final shape of any solution is still being worked out. Many in Sabah and Sarawak argue that they joined in 1963 as regions with a special standing, not simply as ordinary states. While a 2021 constitutional amendments redefined the federation to explicitly mention MA63 and to restore the original wording that distinguishes the Borneo territories, leaders say that the symbolic recognition is only a first step. They want more concrete changes, including stronger representation in parliament, a clearer role in federal decision-making, and institutionalized consultation on matters that affect their rights under MA63. In their view, restoring status is not nostalgia. It is about recalibrating the federation so that the original partners have a real voice in how the country is run. Local leaders in both Sabah and Sarawak are pushing for devolution, more power to manage their own education, healthcare, and other key services. The argument is that decisions made closer to the ground can better reflect local cultures, languages, and needs, especially in rural and indigenous communities. A major breakthrough occurred in early 2025 when Sarawak's state-owned company Petros was officially appointed as the sole gas aggregator for the state. This means that under Sarawak's own gas laws, Petros has practical control over aggregating and managing natural gas supply within the state's borders, including for domestic industries and power generation. Many in Sarawak see this as a concrete victory for local resource management and as a potential blueprint for expanding autonomy in other sectors over time. At the same time, federal laws like the Petroleum Development Act still exist, so the exact legal boundaries of state versus federal control in oil and gas remain alive and sometimes contentious debate. That is why politicians, lawyers, and activists often describe autonomy as a process rather than a single moment of taking back everything at once. Because frustrations have built up, some groups have begun discussing the idea of leaving Malaysia altogether. They frame non-compliance with MA63 as a breach of contract. If the terms of the club have not been honored, why should they be bound by it? Legally, though, leaving is extremely complicated. The federal constitution does not provide a straightforward path for any state to secede, and most constitutional scholars argue that any attempt to do so would trigger a major legal and political crisis rather than a simple yes or no process. For now, talk of separation mainly serves as political leverage, a way to show how deep the dissatisfaction runs and to push the federal government to move faster on implementing MA63 and revisiting financial and autonomy arrangements. The real day-to-day struggle is less about immediate independence and more about getting a fair share and a fair say within the existing federation. So, as we wrap up, it is worth remembering that none of this is just theory. For many in Sabah and Sarawak, MA63 is the lens through which they understand underdevelopment, uneven roads, power cuts, and why their resources have not always translated into local opportunity. This shift is not just about history. It is about raw political math. In the era of fragmented coalitions and hung parliaments, it has become clearer that peninsular-based parties find it very hard to form a stable federal government without support from Borneo blocs. Today, the local coalitions in Borneo, GPS in Sarawak, and GRS in Sabah are widely seen as indispensable partners in building any durable federal administration. Now, while some call them kingmakers, they are perhaps better described as necessary partners, without whom no Malaysian Prime Minister can easily build a stable house. Because no federal government can confidently stay in power without their support. They finally have the leverage to turn talk about MA63 into concrete action on finances, autonomy, and development. From the outside, it looks like Malaysia is entering a new phase where Borneo is no longer a quiet, fixed deposit, but a genuine power center pushing for a fairer deal. Whether that leads to a stronger, more balanced federation or to deeper fragmentation will depend on how honestly these historical promises are confronted and how willing all sides are to compromise. As someone who is not Malaysian, this is where the script ends and your lived experience begins. So, if you are from Sabah, Sarawak, or Peninsular Malaysia, what does this all look like from where you stand? What did this video get right? What did it miss? And what should people outside Malaysia understand better about this moment? Let's keep the discussion in the comments focused on facts, experiences, and solutions rather than personal attacks. The goal here is not to decide Malaysia's future. That is for Malaysians. But to give more people the context they need to understand why East Malaysia is saying, just give us what was promised. Everything you have heard reflects the best information available as of early 2026, but the conversation is still evolving in courtrooms, in parliaments, and in people's daily lives. If you have additional context, corrections, or local perspectives, add them below so that this can become a more complete picture over time and help make the next video even better.